We live in interesting times.
For the headlines.
There has never been a hotter month recorded on Earth than this July, according to the very latest data from the World Meteorological Organization and its Climate Center. The month of July at least equaled, if not surpassed, the hottest month in recorded history.
The United States and Russia ripped up the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, or INF, treaty in a move that raised the specter of an arms race between the global superpowers.
South Korea will remove Japan from its whitelist of trusted trading partners, reciprocating just hours after a similar move by Tokyo.
The trade war between the United States and China escalates as Beijing threatens to unleash countermeasures against U.S. plans to impose tariffs on $300 billion in Chinese goods.
I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Cepeda.
And now to the news. UN Chief Antonio Guterres warned that if we do not take action on climate change now, the extreme weather events the world is witnessing are just the tip of the iceberg, and said that iceberg is also rapidly melting. Speaking to reporters in New York, Guterres said according to the very latest data from the World Meteorological Organization and its Climate Center, the month of July at least equaled, if not surpassed, the hottest month in recorded history. He added that we are on track for the period from 2015 to 2019 to be the 5 hottest years on record. Let's listen in.
We have always lived through hot summers, but this is not the summer of our youth. This is not your grandfather's summer. According to the very latest data from the World Meteorological Organization and its Climate Center, the month of July at least equaled, if not surpassed, the hottest month in recorded history. And this follows the hottest June ever. This is even more significant because the previous hottest month, July 2016, occurred during one of the strongest El Niños ever. That is not the case this year. All of this means we are on track for the period from 2015 to 2019 to be the 5 hottest years on record. This year alone, we have seen temperature records shatter from New Delhi to Anchorage, from Paris to Santiago, from Adelaide to the Arctic Circle. If we do not take action on climate change now, these extreme weather events are just the tip of the iceberg. And the iceberg is also rapidly melting. Indeed, the heat wave which affected Europe in the last months has now raised temperatures in the Arctic and Greenland by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. This is a time when Arctic sea ice is already near record low levels. Preventing irreversible climate disruption is the race of our lives and for our lives. It is a race we can and must win.
North Korea carried out its 3rd weapons test in 8 days on Friday, according to the South's military, but U.S. President Donald Trump said he had no problem with the spate of launches by Pyongyang.
North Korea launching missiles yesterday. How do you feel about that?
Short-range missiles, we never made an agreement on that. I have no problem. We'll see what happens, but these are short-range missiles. They're very standard.
The nuclear-armed North is barred from ballistic missile tests under UN resolutions, and its actions have drawn condemnation from European members of the Security Council. Pyongyang is furious over joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises due to start next week, and analysts say the launches are intended to raise the pressure on Washington. The North fired 2 projectiles from its east coast in the early hours of Friday that flew around 220 kilometers, reaching altitudes of 25 kilometers and speeds of Mach 6.9. The South Joint Chiefs of Staff said unusually fast for a short-range weapon. The flight profile was similar to Wednesday's test, and Seoul's presidential office said it was highly likely to be a new type of short-range ballistic missile.
To other news now, the United States officially withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF, clearing the way for a new arms race with Russia. Take a look. December 8, 1987, the world's 2 most powerful men at the time come together to end the threat of nuclear war. On the left here is Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, and on the right is U.S. President Ronald Reagan. After 4 decades of a spiraling Cold War arms race, the 2 leaders signed a historic agreement, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, known as the INF. It was the first time the superpowers agreed to scale back their nuclear arsenals. More specifically, to ground all and eliminate all ground and ballistic and cruise missiles that ranges between 500 and 1,500 kilometers. Notably, the SS-20 nuclear missile, which Moscow had pointed to several Western capitals. In the years that followed the treaty's conclusion, the 2 countries destroyed more than 2,600 missiles up until the end of the Cold War in 1991. Now, in that same year, the treaty's membership expanded to include successor state of the former Soviet Union. But since the mid-2000 commitment to the landmark treaty has gradually collapsed, with the U.S. and Russia mutually accusing each other of breaches. Moscow argues the agreement unfairly prevents it from acquiring weapons that its neighbors, particularly China, are developing. The Kremlin also contends that the Washington pursuit of strategic anti-ballistic missile systems in Europe could justify its withdrawal from the accord, presumably to deploy its own weapons to target future U.S. anti-missile sites. Now, in 2014, the Obama administration openly accused Russia of violating the treaty when it produced and tested an illegal ground-launched cruise missile, an accusation the Kremlin rejected. But Donald Trump's rise to the presidency was perhaps the straw that broke the camel's back. In February 2019, Russia said it would develop new systems, this in response to President Trump's announcement that the U.S. would withdraw from the INF treaty, setting the 2 countries decades back on matters of disarmament and renewing the prospect of another nuclear disarmament.
I'm concerned about rising tensions between nuclear-armed states. The Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF, is a landmark agreement that helps stabilize Europe and end the Cold War. When it expires tomorrow, the world will lose an invaluable break on nuclear war, and this will likely heighten, not reduce, the threat posed by ballistic missiles. Regardless of what transpires, the parties should avoid destabilizing developments and urgently seek agreement on a new common path for international arms control.
It was not really fully observed by everyone anyway for some time, and in Russia already in 2007, when Russia withdrew from the CFE, the Limitations of Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, then the Russian military and Kremlin were talking about that the INF is also not good for Russia, that they were rather limited. But now the treaty is out. That means soon we're going to see the development and deployment, actually development is already happening, deployment of new weapons. Both sides will exchange propaganda bursts accusing each other, America accusing Russia of violating, Russia accusing America of not only violating but of scrapping the treaty.
NATO blamed Russia on Friday for the demise of a Cold War-era missile treaty and vowed to respond in a measured and responsible way to Moscow's deployment of a cruise missile. The 29-country transatlantic alliance rallied behind Washington after the United States and Russia ripped up the 1987 Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty.
Russia bears the sole responsibility for the demise of the INF Treaty. We don't want a new arms race, and we have no intention to deploy new land-based nuclear missiles in Europe.
Washington has for years accused Russia of developing a new type of missile, the 9M729, which it says violates the treaty, claims that NATO has backed up. The missile has a range of about 1,500 kilometers, according to NATO, though Moscow says it can only travel 480 kilometers. The INF Treaty limits the use of missiles with ranges of 500 to 5,500 kilometers. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced Washington's formal withdrawal in a prepared statement at a regional forum in Bangkok, minutes after Russia pronounced the treaty to be dead.
The area of the fuel tip.
To other news now, pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong geared up Friday for more rallies in defiance of a series of warnings from China and after a prominent independence campaigner was arrested. The semi-autonomous southern Chinese city has seen 2 months of unrest that was triggered by opposition to a planned extradition law, but quickly evolved into a wider movement for democratic reforms. Authorities in Hong Kong and Beijing this week signaled a hard-hitting stance, including with the arrests of dozens of protesters, and the Chinese military described the unrest as intolerable. But more protests have been scheduled starting on Friday evening, right now, with members of the Hong Kong's usually tight-lipped civil service due to hold a rally despite a government warning that they could be sacked for doing so. Medical workers have also called a rally for Friday evening, and their unsanctioned marches planned for Saturday and Sunday, as well as a citywide strike on Monday. The protests against a now suspended extradition bill, which would have seen people sent for trial in Communist Party-controlled mainland courts, have expanded to demands for greater democracy and the resignation of Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam. Under Chinese rule, Hong Kong has been allowed to retain extensive freedoms, such as an independent judiciary, but many residents see the extradition bill as the latest step in a relentless march toward mainland control. The civil servants' rally will be the first time government employees have actively promoted a demonstration in Hong Kong. An open letter by a group of civil servants asked Hong Kong Chief Carrie Lam to respond positively to 5 public demands: withdraw the extradition bill completely, stop calling the protests rioting, waive all charges against those arrested, set up an independent commission of inquiry, and restart political reform.
Boris Johnson suffered a setback in his first ballot box test as British Prime Minister on Friday after the Conservative candidate lost to a pro-EU rival in a by-election that slims his parliamentary majority to 1. Thursday's vote in the Welsh sheep farming community of Brecon and Radnorshire offered a stark choice between the Brexit-backing incumbent from Johnson's ruling Tories and a Liberal Democrat who wants to preserve Britain's 4-decade membership of the European Union. Johnson dropped by the region Tuesday to help out Chris Davis, a Conservative MP who was forced to step down after being criminally convicted of expenses fraud. Davis protested his innocence and contested a seat again, but saw the Liberal Democrats' Jane Dodds overturn his previous majority of 8,038 and win by a margin of 1,425 votes.
Do everything I can to help.
People in Brecon and Radnorshire have sent a powerful message to Westminster. We demand better. Facing a no-deal Brexit demand better. My very first act as your MP when I arrive in Westminster will be to find Mr. Boris Johnson wherever he's hiding and tell him loud and clear, stop playing with the future of our communities and rule out a no-deal Brexit now.
Johnson's newly formed government is trying to force Brussels to return to the negotiating table by insisting Britain is ready to leave the EU without a deal on the latest delayed departure date of October 31. Finance Minister Sajid Javid announced Wednesday an extra £2.1 billion and that's 2.6 billion to 2.3 billion euros in funding to prepare for such an eventuality. But Bank of England Governor Mark Carney said Friday a no-deal Brexit would be a shock for the country's economy, causing supply disruption and potentially undermining entire sectors such as the car industry and farming.
If, as assumed, Brexit proceeds, in the event of no deal, no transition Brexit, sterling would likely fall, the risk premiums on UK assets would rise, and volatility would spike higher.
In other news, Saudi Arabia will allow women to travel abroad without approval from a male guardian. That is according to the government on Thursday, ending a restriction that drew international censure and prompted extreme attempts to flee the kingdom. The regulation effectively allows women over the age of 21 to obtain passports and leave the country without their guardian's permission. This landmark reform erodes the long-standing guardianship system that renders adult women as legal minors and allows their guardians, husbands, father, and other male relatives to exercise arbitrary authority over them. The reform comes as Saudi Arabia faces heightened international scrutiny over its human rights record, including an ongoing trial of women activists who have long demanded that the guardianship system will be dismantled. Now that includes Lojan Al-Hathloul, a prominent rights activist who marked her 30th birthday this week in a Saudi prison. Some have undertaken perilous attempts to escape overseas despite the reforms. They include 18-year-old Rahaf Al-Kunun, whose live tweeted asylum plea from a Bangkok hotel in January after she fled her Saudi family drew global attention. Later, two Saudi sisters who sought sanctuary in Hong Kong from what they called family abuse were allowed passage to a third country that was not named for their safety. And subsequently, two other Saudi sisters fled to Georgia.
An Ebola epidemic in eastern Congo, or DR Congo, marked its first anniversary on Thursday with two more cases in the densely populated frontier city of Goma and accusations by Kinshasa that Rwanda had rushed to shutter its border in response to the crisis. The two new cases of infection are the wife and baby of a man who had died of Ebola on Wednesday, health workers said. More than 1,800 lives had been lost in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo since Ebola broke out on August 1, 2018. Fears that the disease could spread to neighboring countries have mounted since mid-July when the first of two fatalities occurred in Goma, a transport hub lying adjacent to the Rwandan city of Gisenyi. DRC President Felix Tshisekedi's office on Thursday said Rwanda had made a unilateral decision to close its border, a move it said that was reversed 8 hours later. Health experts told journalists at the UN that closing a border was counterproductive and can send an epidemic underground. On the one-year anniversary of the declaration of an Ebola outbreak in Mangina, in the north of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ebola Emergency Response Coordinator David Gresley said he never thought we would still be talking about the same outbreak. Briefing reporters via teleconference from the city of Beni, Gresley explained the difficulties in containing and eradicating the disease.
The environment is difficult because of the high density of population. It's difficult because it's a conflict zone and has been for the last 25 years. It's an area of opposition politically that has felt marginalized with a high distrust of local authorities, all of which make it very complicated to work here. It was also heavily affected by the decision of the National Electoral Commission not to hold presidential elections at the end of 2018. And that created a lot of suspicion about Ebola, whether it was real or not, or why it was used as a pretext not to hold the elections. There's still too many gaps in the response. Either geographically, there are zones that are at risk where the virus can come into, and we don't detect it as quickly as we should. And we need to be able to anticipate where the virus is going, not chasing it around once it starts to replicate in a new area. We had a recent case in Goma, in which it looks like there's more than one individual that has been that's infected. It's a stark reminder that as long as it circulates in this area, it can move into a new area like Goma. We had a case that crossed into Uganda. We had another case that was close to the border with South Sudan. And the longer it continues to circulate in this area, the more likely we'll see a chain of transmission established in another part of this country or a neighboring country.
With NTN 24 International News.
All right, we have breaking news right now from Indonesia. A strong earthquake struck off the coast of Indonesia's Java Island on Friday. Now, it was reported that buildings swayed as far away as the capital and prompted national authorities to urge those in the coastal areas to head to higher ground in case of a tsunami. Now, the U.S. Geological Survey reported the magnitude 6.8 quake was centered 151 kilometers from Banten province of the island's southwest coast, and it said it hit at a depth of 42.8 kilometers. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center did not issue a tsunami warning, watch, or advisory after the quake. Indonesian authorities, however, issued their own. Now, buildings in Jakarta were reportedly swaying for nearly a minute during the evening quake. Television footage, we'll show you later, showed workers and residents running out of high-rise buildings. And we'll bring you more updates as we follow this developing story. Eagle News International will be right back. Stay tuned.
President Donald Trump announced he will hit China with punitive tariffs on another $300 billion in goods, escalating the trade war after accusing Beijing of reneging on more promises. The 10% duties will take effect September 1 and come on top of the 25% tariffs on $250 billion in imports, meaning Trump now has targeted virtually all of the $500 billion in goods America buys from China every year. President Trump's new tariffs on China sent a shockwave through global markets Thursday, pushing Wall Street stocks into the red, sharpening an oil price rout and pressuring U.S. Treasury yields. Major U.S. indices, which has been up more than 1% earlier in the day, did an about-face after Trump's tweet. The Dow finished 1.1% lower at 26,583.42, losing more than 400 points following the tariff announcement. The news prompted a broad-based sell-off, but fell especially hard on retailers such as Best Buy, which plunged 10.8%, Target, which tumbled 4.4%, and Macy's, which sank 6.7%. At the White House, Trump told reporters he was not concerned by the negative reaction among investors, saying he had anticipated it.
No, I'm not concerned about that at all. I expected that a little bit because people don't understand quite yet about what's happened. We've taxed China on $300 billion worth of goods and products being sold into our country, and China eats it because they have to pay it, because what they do is they devalue their currency and they push money out. Our people haven't paid. As you know, we're also charging them 25% on $250 billion. So we're taking in many billions of dollars. There's been absolutely no inflation, and frankly, it hasn't cost our consumer anything. It cost China. Now, what has happened is a lot of companies are moving out of China so they could avoid, and China's had a rough this is their worst year in 27 years, according to yesterday's Wall Street Journal. I don't want that. But when my people came home, they said, we're talking, we have another meeting in early September. I said, that's fine. But in the meantime, until such time as there's a deal, we'll be taxing them. What would you say when China, for the last 20 years, has been taking hundreds of billions of dollars out of our country? And we had a president that would never do anything, a number of presidents that never would do anything about it. What would you say? I think President Xi, who's somebody I like a lot, I think he wants to make a deal, but frankly, he's not going fast enough. He said he was going to be buying from our farmers. He didn't do that. He said he was going to stop fentanyl from coming into our country. It's all coming out of China. He didn't do that. We're losing thousands of people to fentanyl. What China is doing is they're devaluing their currency and they're pumping money out like they've never done before, and they're paying for these tariffs. We're not.
You put a date of September 1 on these tariffs. Are you giving Xi a chance to negotiate and
No. September 1. The reason is it takes a long time for the ships to come over, and it's a period of time. So I'm giving them like a 4-week period of time before the tariffs go on. But we're now taking in tariffs on 10% on over $300 billion and 25% on $250 billion. And it's been proven that our people are not paying for those tariffs.
China warned on Friday it will take countermeasures if the United States follows through on its threat to impose tariffs on $300 billion in Chinese goods in an escalation of their trade war. Take a look.
美方称将于9月1日对3000亿美元中国输美商品加征10%关税，此举严重违背中美两国元首大阪会晤共识，背离了正确的轨道，无异于解决问题。中方对此强烈不满，坚决反对。如果美方加征关税的措施付诸实施，中方将不得不采取必要的反制措施，坚决地捍卫国家的核心利益 和人民的根本利益，由此产生的一切后果将全部由美方承担。
Now, she didn't specify what kind of measures China would take. But in the past, Beijing has hinted that it could restrict exports of rare earths that are vital to the U.S. technology industry. And it's also drawing up a blacklist of unreliable foreign companies. President Trump's announcement means virtually all of the $660 billion in annual two-way trade between the world's two biggest economies will have tariffs on it. China has imposed tariffs on $110 billion in U.S. goods, almost all of the products it imports from the U.S. Now, President Trump said 10% duties on $300 billion will take effect September 1 and come on top of the 25% tariffs on $250 billion in Chinese imports already in place.
Bank of England Governor Mark Carney warns of the risks of leaving the European Union with no deal, saying that the transition is always preferable.
In the event of no deal, no transition Brexit, sterling would likely fall, the risk premiums on UK assets would rise, and volatility would spike higher. If, as assumed, Brexit proceeds smoothly to some form of deal, market interest rates would probably rise and sterling would probably appreciate. That's different preparing for a contingency, and the country has to be prepared for that contingency. Financial sector is prepared for that contingency. A contingency is different than what's most likely, and all I can do is quote the Prime Minister speaking earlier this week when he said, "We're not aiming for no deal. We don't think that's where we'll end up." The no deal as a crystallization of a bad economic outcome is not preferable to the possibility of a better economic outcome. And as we have said, since immediately following the referendum, that it is whatever outcome the country chooses, it is always preferable to have a transition to it.
Bank of England Governor Mark Carney warned on Thursday of the risks of leaving the European Union with no deal as the institution lowered its economic growth forecast for 2019 and 2020. He blamed Brexit uncertainty and the weaker global activity due to trade tensions for the downgrade of projected growth to 1.3% in 2019 and 2020, down from 1.5 and 1.6% forecast in May. The Central Bank's Monetary Policy Committee voted to keep the key interest rate at 0.75%. But the projections assume a smooth adjustment to new trading terms with the EU, and Carney noted that since May, the perceived likelihood of a no-deal Brexit has increased significantly. Boris Johnson took over as Britain's Prime Minister last week, promising to deliver Brexit on the next scheduled departure date of October 31, with or without a deal with Brussels.
South Korea will remove Japan from its whitelist of trusted trading partners, reciprocating just hours after a similar move by Tokyo. During a rare live television broadcast of his cabinet meeting, South Korean President Moon Jae-in threatened countermeasures after Japan's cabinet approved the removal of South Korea's fast-track export status from August 28.
앞으로 벌어질 사태의 책임도 전적으로 일본 정부에 있다는 점을 분명히 경고합니다. 글로벌 공급망을 무너뜨려 세계 경제에 큰 피해를 끼치는 이기적인 민폐 행위로 국제사회의 지탄을 면할 수 없을 것입니다. 이미 경고한 바와 같이 우리 경제를 의도적으로 타격한다면 일본도 큰 피해를 감수해야 할 것입니다. 하지만 우리는 다시는 일본에게 지지 않을 것입니다.
Tokyo's move came with the countries mired in a long-running dispute over the use of forced labor during World War II, But Japan insisted it was related to national security and was not retaliatory. South Korean officials have held a different perspective, though, particularly since last month, when Japan tightened curbs on exports to South Korea of 3 high-tech materials needed to make memory chips and display panels, threatening the global supply of chips. While Japan justified its decision on national security grounds, it has also pointed to an erosion of trust in South Korean court rulings ordered Japanese firms to compensate wartime forced laborers. Tokyo said that issue was settled by a 1965 treaty that normalized ties between the two countries. South Korea would be the first country to be removed from Japan's whitelist, which currently has 27 countries, including Germany, Britain, and the United States.
Angry South Koreans demonstrate after Tokyo removed Seoul from a so-called white list of favored export partners in a dispute over wartime forced labor. Just hours after Seoul's finance minister announced it will also remove Japan from its white list of trusted trading partners. Watch this.
정권 때 이 정권을 지금 무너뜨리고 다음 정권 때 친일적인 정권을 세울 수 있을 거라는 기대를 하고 있는 것 같은데요. 우리 국민들 절대 그렇게 생각하지 않고 있습니다. 다시는 무릎 꿇고 사죄하는 것밖에 방법은 없습니다. 우리나라는 부정한 권력을 촛불의 힘으로 끌어내렸던 국민들입니다. 굉장히 단결력이 높은 국민들입니다. 일본의 이 부당한 저항 앞에 끝까지 싸울 것이고요. 중도에 하차하는 일 없을 테니까 힘들면 본인이 포기하시라고 말씀드리겠습니다.
일본의 평안법을 개헌해서 군사대국화, 군국주의화로 나가기 위한 아베 일당의 그런 발악적 그런 기습이다 이렇게 생각합니다. 그러나 그 기습은 필경 성공하지 못하고 필경 실패하고 말 것임을 저희들은 확신합니다.
Eagle News International will be right back. Stay tuned.
Chris Manguera, currently the Chief Marketing Officer of GCash.
I'm Billy Dominguez, President of Green Circle Realty.
I'm Emil Quijano. I am the Sales and Marketing Director of Royal Care Marketing.
And I would like to invite everyone to please watch
Open for Business every Saturday, 5 p.m. on Eagle News.
And here on Net 25.
Letters and Music, Lunes hanggang Biyernes, 1:00 hanggang 2:00 ng hapon.
Going now to Bangkok, South Korea said at the ASEAN Foreign Minister Summit that, quote, we must choose to enlarge the piece of the pie that we all share through expanding free flow of trade and commerce rather than taking steps to shrink it, after Japan voted to remove Seoul from favored export partner list. Let's listen in.
In this regard, I am compelled to draw your attention to the decision made by Japan just this morning to remove my country from its list of trading partners that receive comprehensive export preferential treatment, and this in a very unilateral and arbitrary manner. We are gravely concerned by this decision, to say the least, this coming in particular in the footsteps of an earlier decision that restricts some key export items to Korea. Let us not be deterred in our collective efforts to expand free, fair, and non-discriminatory trade in this region.
I have not heard any complaints from our ASEAN friends about our export management measures. ROK has been and is going to enjoy preferred status or equal status with our ASEAN friends. And I don't know what is the source of complaint by Foreign Minister Kang. Maintaining effective export control over sensitive goods and technologies from a security perspective is Japan's responsibility as a member of the international community. Japan's necessary and legitimate review of its export control is fully compatible with a free trade regime. Amid growing protectionism in recent years, we need to uphold free and fair world trade in order to promote economic growth in the region.
Against this backdrop, we should avoid further delay in agreeing to the RCEP. The negotiations should be concluded within this year, and the ROK hopes that an agreement that is comprehensive, ambitious, and mutually beneficial can be reached, thus strengthening the foundation for a freer and fairer trading system in our region. We must choose to enlarge the piece of the pie that we all share through expanding free flow of trade and commerce rather than taking steps to shrink it. Unfortunately, that fundamental principle is being challenged in our own region.
Japan's government on Friday decided to rescind South Korea's favored export partner status, prompting fury from Seoul over the reckless act and concern about security ties between the U.S. allies. The move comes with the countries mired in a long-running dispute over the use of forced labor during World War II, but Japan insists the move is related to national security and is not retaliatory. Tokyo moved ahead with the decision despite U.S. calls for its allies to calm tensions and a warning from South Korea of grave consequences, including a review of bilateral security ties.
America's top diplomat Mike Pompeo on Friday implored Southeast Asian nations to trust in U.S. values, delivering a withering takedown of Chinese-style development, comments Beijing later swatted away as meaningless. The Secretary of State said decades of U.S. alliance and investment had helped Asia walk from poverty to prosperity as he aired the Trump administration's Indo-Pacific strategy in Bangkok. From supporting state-led enterprises to disputes over contested territories, Pompeo took aim at China's actions and motivations in Southeast Asia, rowing back on comments on Thursday in which he told regional diplomats they were not expected to choose sides between the superpowers.
For decades, China has taken advantage. Our investments don't serve a government, and our investments here don't serve a political party, or frankly, a country's imperial ambitions. No, we are building roads to pave our national sovereignty. We don't fund bridges to close gaps of loyalty.
His speech came hours after President Donald Trump promised to slap 10% tariffs on a further $300 billion of Chinese goods in a sharp escalation of the trade war between the two superpowers.
We are building roads to pave. For decades, China has taken advantage of trade. Taking advantage of trade versus the United States of America, and taking advantage of trade versus countries in Asia and Southeast Asia. And it's time for that to stop. And President Trump has said, we're going to fix this.
And staying in Bangkok, several small bombs exploded across the country on Friday, rattling the Thai capital as it hosted a regional summit attended by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and leaving 4 people wounded but not disrupting the diplomatic event. Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha blamed the bombs on ill-intended people inciting violence to destroy peace and the country's image, while top ASEAN diplomats and their U.S. and Chinese counterparts are in town. Small devices believed to be the so-called ping-pong bombs, around the size of a table tennis ball, exploded at several locations across the city, all far from the summit venue. 2 further explosions shattered glass near a well-known downtown skyscraper, according to emergency police. Bomb disposal experts were deployed around the Mahanakorn Tower, owned by the King Power Group that counts Leicester City Football Club among its assets. The bombings took place just before a keynote speech by America's top diplomat, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, in which he praised Thailand for rejoining the democratic fold after 5 years of outright junta rule. Now, the incidents raised the uncomfortable memory of Thailand's last hosting of ASEAN in 2009. Now, back then, protesters from the pro-democracy Red Shirt faction smashed their way into the summit venue in the resort city of Pattaya, demanding elections. Pandemonium ensued, with a number of leaders having to be rescued from a hotel roof by Thai army helicopters, while others fled by boat. Thailand has a long history of political violence linked to mass protests, coups, and short-lived governments.
In other news now, British Royal Air Force helicopters lower bags of aggregate into a damaged part of a reservoir dam wall on the verge of collapse as firefighters pump out water. The Todd Reservoir Dam is feared to be on the verge of caving in following heavy rain threatening the lives and homes of residents in the central English town of Whaley Bridge who have been evacuated.
The rest of the village, if it actually bursts, it'd wipe it out, because there's a school just at the bottom of the reservoir, there's a park for the kids at the bottom of the reservoir, and all the shops and amenities are there, and the train tracks actually at the bottom, and I've just found out that they've stopped all the trains now. So you virtually cut off. You can't, if you go out of the town, you can't get back in. So we basically cut off.
Surreal. It's all very surreal. It doesn't seem like it's happening at all. It genuinely is a nightmare.
Hundreds of people were evacuated from a town in central England as British military helicopter was called in Friday to prevent a reservoir dam from collapsing. The Toddbrook Reservoir Dam was feared to be on the verge of caving in following heavy rain, threatening the lives and homes of residents in Whaley Bridge. One side of the dam spillway weakened when the panels started to come away on Thursday. A Royal Air Force helicopter lowered bags of aggregate into the damaged part of the dam wall on Friday, while firefighters scrambled from around the country have been pumping water out of the reservoir. Whaley Bridge in Derbyshire is on the edge of the Peak District National Park and 16 miles southeast of the city of Manchester. The reservoir dates back to the 19th century. Fast-flowing water has been rushing over the spillway before the collapse.
And here's Ben Bernaldez for Sports News.
In baseball, 6 players and 2 managers were hit with multi-game suspension on Thursday as Major League Baseball threw the book at the Pittsburgh Pirates and Cincinnati Reds over their bench-clearing mass brawl. 2 days after fists flew in one of the ugliest skirmishes of the season, the league cracked down on players and management from both teams. The mayhem erupted on Tuesday after Pirates pitcher Kyungwha intentionally threw a pitch near the head of the Reds' Derek Dietrich. Kyungwha, who later instigated the brawl, was given a 10-game suspension. Kala's teammate Jose Osuna and Kyle Crick were given 5 and 3 game bans, respectively. Manager Clint Hurdle was hit with a 2-game suspension. On the Red side, manager David Bell was banned for 6 games, while pitcher Amir Garrett was suspended for 8 games. Jared Hughes was given a 3-game suspension, while Cuban slugger Yasiel Puig, who was later traded to the Cleveland Indians, was also banned for 3 games. In addition, all of the players and staff suspended were given undisclosed fines. Pirates pitcher Trevor Williams, Reds first baseman Joey Votto, and Reds outfielder Philip Irvin were also fined. Major League Baseball's Chief Baseball Officer Joe Torres said in a statement the stiff punishment were intended to send a message to both clubs. Tuesday's incident was the latest large-scale fight involving the two teams. Earlier this season, the benches cleared after Red slugger Dietrich smacked a home run out of Pittsburgh's PNC Park ground. Dietrich was later targeted with a pitch, triggering a melee involving players from both sides. In Senegal, the 17th edition of the Basketball Without Borders camp is being held. The program is organized by the NBA and aims to develop basketball skills and unearth new young talents. 60 young people from 29 African countries are taking part in this year's edition. During the 4-day camp, young people can meet and discuss with NBA stars and also benefit from the guidance of American coaches to help them improve their basketball skills.
Personnellement, je suis vraiment ravi par cette belle initiative de comment construire un terrain ici, nous jeunes de Guédiawaye, nous jeunes de banlieue, ici dans notre quartier, un terrain de basket, parce qu'on était obligé de partir à Dakar pour faire nos sports là-bas et on était vraiment fatigués. Au retour, on ne pouvait pas nous concentrer sur les études et se concentrer sur le basket. Et maintenant, on voit qu'on a un terrain ici. On peut jouer le basket jusqu'à l'heure où nous voulons et on peut aussi étudier en même temps. Ça fait vraiment plaisir. Nous sommes vraiment contents.
C'est ça. Donc, ce camp va permettre au continent africain de rehausser le niveau du basketball continental. Alors, donc, nous allons continuer à le supporter. C'est un programme qui travaille avec la FIBA, qui est notre partenaire. Et ensemble, nous pensons que nous pouvons réellement toucher plus de jeunes sur le continent et les soutenir dans leur passion, qui est le basket.
And these are the stories for EN Sports. I'm Ben Bernaldez and I'm 1 with 25.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards and Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Cepeda. Thanks for joining us.
And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles and we're 1 with 25.